Hello, everybody. My name is Cuau Arau. I know my name is very hard to pronounce, even for people who speak Spanish. My friends call me Cuau, and you can call me whatever you want, but if you want to call me Cuau, that would be good.
Okay.
It's difficult to say what I do for a living because I do a lot of stuff. All of it has to do with teaching and studying self-knowledge and human development. That's what I like the most. That's my passion. And during this interview, I will do my best to be understandable in English. And for that, all of you at home will notice that I'm gonna be reading most of my ideas and questions because that way it's gonna be easier for me. Today, as you can notice, is one of the happiest days of my life because I have the opportunity to talk to one of my biggest idols and colleagues, Ken Wilber, that you can see here next to me. Thank you so much, Ken, for being here. How are you today?
I'm just fine. Glad to be here.
I'm really glad that you took my invitation because I know that you have changed my life and you have changed a lot of people's lives. And it's good to refresh these ideas that you talk in all your books. How many books do you think you have published?
35.
35. And those books have been translated to lots of languages. I have many of them in here. I just recovered because I lent it to a friend, my books in sex, ecology, and spirituality. Ever since you told me we were going to talk. So I went for my book because I had to have it next to me. I describe Ken Wilber as a philosopher with a mystical and a scientific outlook. I think that's what's very peculiar about your work. Ken Wilber is considered one of the founders of transpersonal psychology and obviously the founder of the integral movement. And you've been called before the Einstein, the Albert Einstein of consciousness. If I were to talk about one simple and powerful idea that Ken Wilber has contributed to my life, I would say that from him, I learned that everybody's ideas and proposals always have a place from which to contribute and add value. This is something that changed my life. When you say something like, in the same way that nobody can be completely right, well, nobody can be completely wrong. Therefore, all the ideas can be put together and add value, but you have to find their place in the map. Is that somehow what you said?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so finally, in this context, by a way of introduction, I will summarize what I have been sharing with people for many years, because that way my questions will make much more sense for everybody from that perspective. So for more than 20 years, I've been saying that we people are a soul that is incarnated at this moment in a human body, and this human body has 6 dimensions through which we interact with the world. These dimensions are the biological dimension, the bodily or kinesthetic dimension, the motor dimension could be too, the sexual, the emotional, the intellectual or cognitive, and the spiritual. I deal with those 6. I know there are many intelligences that we have found, but with these 6, I find to be enough to understand the possibilities of a human. So I'm going to be asking you to share your insights on these 6 areas of life.
They were biological, sexual, emotional, intellectual, spiritual. Which one did I leave out?
Biological, bodily, or corporal.
Is that different from the biological?
Yes, because biological is like the systems that keep us alive, and they are all unconscious, like breathing or digestion. And by bodily, I mean the motor, the movement, those actions that are conscious actions that we have to say. And in that second dimension, I put the actual doing and achieving and transforming the third dimension. So that's why I put them separately.
Okay.
So having said that, the first thing I want to ask you, Ken, is from your present way of looking at things, is it okay if we say that the soul is the same as the consciousness? Are they just different words showing the same thing?
Well, they're generally quite similar, but you can draw specific differences between them as well. The soul, for example, has a sense of personality or individuality. So if there is reincarnation, it's the soul that would reincarnate. And consciousness is a broader meaning to it. So it means awareness or general experience. experience, or first person awareness. First person is described as the person who is speaking, I, me, mine. Second person is the person being spoken to, so that's you or I or thou. Third person is the person or thing being spoken about, so that's he, she, they, them, it, or its. So consciousness in general is a first person experiential entity. And in a certain sense, the soul is as well. But again, the soul has more an individual entity meaning to it. So it is the thing that is going to reincarnate. And you're going to be aware of it as yourself.
What I'm getting is that the word consciousness would include soul and spirit. It's a broader concept.
Sure.
Because of that, soul is more the individual part of consciousness, and spirit may be the word for explaining the holistic view of consciousness. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. If I go a little bit deeply on that sense, ever since you wrote The Spectrum of Consciousness, which is your first book, would you say that you've changed your view on consciousness? Do you have a simpler explanation now or a different explanation?
No, it's still basically the substance that is aware. And I still believe that's essentially what it is. What I have done is divided it into more sections. So I've learned more of the levels of consciousness and the stages that consciousness goes through. And I've divided it into different types of areas that we're conscious of, like waking up, growing up, showing up, cleaning up, and opening up. And each of those are very important areas, because what's really important about them is that each of those, waking up, growing up, opening up, cleaning up, and showing up, give us a different type of wholeness. And that's important to realize. I used to think, and I've changed my mind in this regard, I used to think that wholeness, there was just one wholeness, and you were with it or not. But you can be like a Zen student, say 1,000 years ago, and you're meditating in the woods, trying to get your first Satori or unity consciousness experience. And all of a sudden you don't just see the sun, you're one with the sun. You don't feel the earth, you're one with the earth. You're not seeing the forest, you're one with the entire forest. But notice you still think the sun goes around the earth, and you still think the earth is flat. This is 1,000 years ago, after all. And when it comes to the trees and the woods, you're not aware of their atoms, molecules, cells, or any of that degree of understanding. So each of those is a different type of wholeness. And so finding radical wholeness,
your new book,
I talk about those 5 areas and how you can realize one of them without realizing any of the others. And so you have to be really careful to recognize and use practices and awarenesses that will put you in touch with each of these 5 major types of wholeness. And of course, you're conscious of each of them. And so consciousness is an important part of that.
Let me see if I understand that right. Wouldn't it be better to say that it's consciousness itself who is doing the cleaning up, the showing up, the growing up? Is that part of ourselves who is doing the actions that you talk about in your book?
That is being aware of those actions.
Okay, so let me ask you what I think is an abstract question. If we are, as I said, a soul that is inhabiting this human body, and this body is an organical, biological entity, what were we thinking? Why did the soul decided to do that in that particular way from your point of view? Because we could have been something different. Maybe we could have an etherical body only, or mechanical iron body or something like that. But the soul decided to be in this experience, which is a very strange experience. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it actually starts with spirit. And to talk about spirit, we can introduce the great chain of being, which is a hierarchy of levels of consciousness. And each major religion has a different great chain of being, from the Buddhist Vijnanas to the Hindu layers of consciousness and being. To the simplest is the Christian, and it gives 5 layers. Not quite your 6, but similar. It's matter, which just means dead, insentient, non-living substance, physical matter, and then body, which means the living body, and then mind, and then soul, and then spirit. And each one of those transcends and includes its predecessor. So, and there's 2 different ways that those move in relation to each other. One is called involution, and that's where the world just starts out as just pure spirit, but spirit decides to throw itself outward and downward to create a world. And so spirit throws itself out to create a smaller version of itself called soul, and then soul throws itself outward to create a smaller version of itself called mind, and then mind throws itself outward to create a body, and the body throws itself out until it hits clunk, dead bottom, and can't go any lower, and that's just the material physical world. So each one of those had reasons for selecting a lower level, like we're in a body because mind chose to inhabit a physical living body, and so it did, and it threw itself outward to create a body. And when it threw itself outward, it tended to at first forget itself. It wasn't aware that it was a mind. It was just there was just a body. And then the body, with what little consciousness it had left, decided, hell, I'm going to throw myself out again. And it lost a great deal of its consciousness and just became insentient matter. But with Whitehead and a good-sized majority of Western philosophers are what's called panpsychic. And I don't like that term very much. I'll tell you why in a moment. But a panpsychic is somebody who believes that everything in the universe has some degree of consciousness or awareness in it. So an electron, a proton, and a neutron, all of them have a degree of what Alfred North Whitehead called prehension. And prehension just means touch. And touch just means if you touch something, you're aware of it. So it means it's a certain bit of awareness or consciousness in protons, neutrons, and electrons. And when they come together, they form atoms. And atoms have a bit of atomic prehension. And then atoms come together into molecules. And molecules have a bit of molecular prehension or consciousness. And then those molecules come together to form living cells. And those cells, those living, moving cells, have a bit of consciousness or prehension as well. And then those single cells come together into multicellular plants and animals. And each of those has a little bit more consciousness. And so you can see it's reversing the degree of consciousness that became less and less during the downward movement or involution. And this reverse motion is called evolution. And that's what evolution is. Now, Darwin is credited with discovering evolution. But today, there's quite a bit of disagreement about what constitutes evolution. And it comes in 2 parts. One is the what of evolution, and the other, where all the disagreement comes in, is the how of evolution.
Okay.
So the what of evolution is just the various plants and animals and the order that they were created, that they evolved. So there were first simple atoms, then molecules, then simple single cellular animals and plants like bacteria or viruses or stuff like that. And then from there, we went into multicellular animals and plants, fish to reptiles to mammals to primates to human beings. And when evolutionary psychologists today say nobody disagrees with evolution, it's a fact. It's not even a hypothesis. its effect. What they mean is the what of evolution.
Exactly, that it is happening.
It is happening, and we have proof, fossil proof of the order that they emerge and so on. Everybody agrees with the what of evolution. There's almost no agreement today on the how of evolution.
Okay.
And Darwin believed that it was chance mutation and then natural selection.
Exactly.
But chance mutations are much too rare to account for the enormous diversity of plants and animals that there are. I mean, there are billions of species of animals, and it's been estimated that the number of mutations to create a single living mammal, like a dog or a deer or a horse, is 10 to the 300th power.
Okay.
It's 10 followed by 300 zeros.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just impossible. There is no natural selection that happens at that rate. And so what the slight majority of evolutionary biologists now believe is that there's actually a fourth force or a fifth force in the universe, in addition to strong and weak nuclear, electromagnetic, and gravity. There's a fifth force, and it's called generally self-organization. And that's a very real existing force of nature. It exists alongside the other four major physical forces. And self-evolution actually, well, it's like if you have water swirling down a drain and all of a sudden it forms a perfect whirlpool and goes down like that. That's a self-organizing drive. The whirlpool self-organizes itself out of chaotic material. And most biological evolutionary theorists believe that there are four forces plus self-organization. And so Stuart Kauffman of the famous Santa Fe Institute, which is a very famous systems theory institute that studies systems, he actually writes that evolution is driven by certain mutations that are themselves largely driven by self-organization and do have natural selection operating on them. Natural selection particularly operates in small changes, like a moth changing color from white to dark black if it exists in a
blacker environment.
Right.
Okay.
So that's the story on evolution. And I believe that all four quadrants have an evolutionary self-organizing drive. And so all of them keep getting more complex, slightly more conscious, and that accounts for everything, basically.
But did I hear you right when you say you didn't agree completely with the idea that everything has some sort of consciousness? But at the same time, you're saying that there is a system of, what did you say about the pantheist?
Yeah, when I said I didn't agree with all of evolution, I meant I didn't agree with the Darwinian version.
Okay, with the randomness of it.
Yeah, the how is he's just wrong about that. The what he got right. And that's the part of evolution that nobody disagrees with.
Perfect. So that's the place of big consciousness. Big consciousness, it is that fifth force that is working with the universe, giving it some order.
Right.
Instead of just random chaotic things.
Right. And so to answer your original question of why is the soul in the body, I said, well, we have to go back to spirit. And what I mean is we have to go back to the beginning of involution, which goes from spirit to soul to mind to body to matter. And spirit decides for whatever reason you can think of. Now, I'm pretty much okay with whatever reason anybody wants to come up with. Spirit could be sitting around thinking, I'm getting kind of bored here all by myself. I think I'll create a bunch of souls.
Okay.
And I want it to be conscious and to be almost as good as me, but a little bit less than I am. So I'll just throw out a smaller version of myself and make a soul, and I'll make plenty of them. And then the souls will go ahead and inhabit whatever they want to when they find themselves existing and being where maybe they'll want to exist in a mind or a body or matter, wherever. I'll just leave that up to them. So it goes ka-choo and blows itself out and creates a soul. And then souls wake up and find themselves existing separately, and they'll go, wait a minute, I don't want to exist just without a body or without feeling or without anything. So I'm going to go ahead and create a mind. And then that way I'll be able to think and do mathematics and logic and all sorts of fun things. And so it creates a mind and it inhabits the mind.
Which is very similar to soul, but a little less powerful.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. It's got a little bit less consciousness and a little bit less capabilities, but it still itself has an enormous amount of capabilities, including thought, logic, mathematics, all of that. And that is not generally something that the soul has access to because it really doesn't want to. Again, you can
unnecessary. Yeah,
that's right. You can think up any reasons you want to for the involutionary process. We just like evolution. We know the stages of evolution. We know the stages of involution largely from India.
Okay,
because India was the first mother country that is really just the mother source of all religions. It's got the source of Buddhism and Hinduism itself has got 100 different religious flavors. And they also, of course, invented meditation. And what you do in meditation is you follow an evolutionary path upward. So you might start with your typical mental state, and then you use something that will let you move beyond the mind. So it could be Vipassana meditation, or just being aware of the mind and with the witnessing, and you witness mental states. When you witness something, you're no longer one with it. You're aware of it as an object. And so you become aware of the mind, and therefore you'll be looking at the mind as an object. And therefore you're no longer just the mind. You've moved up higher into the soul. And then you can bring awareness to the soul. And as you do that, you'll start to disidentify with the soul, and you'll more and more identify with pure spirit itself. So the great Indian sages kept track of all of those stages as they were going up. They'd write them down. So they'd have, well, I have matter, and I have body, and I have mind, and I see I also have a soul, and now I have pure spirit. And wow, spirit is amazing. Spirit is blissful, it's being, it's consciousness, it's bliss, it's all these wonderful things. And then as you come out of meditation, you come down from spirit and you re-enter soul. So you write down soul, and then out of soul, and you can enter mind. So you write down mind. And then when you're in your mind and you look around, you realize, hey, I have a body. So you write down body. And then you notice that the body can feel things, but there are parts of the body that have no feeling, like bones or whatever. And so you write down just matter. And so you know all the stages of involution, just as you know all the stages of evolution. And then the smart ones, of course, put them together and said, oh, people ask, how can you get mind out of body? Because mind is so much more complex than body. And the Indians would give a simple answer. Well, you can get mind out of body because you put mind into body, into the involutionary process. That's how it got in there in the first place. So, of course, you can get it out. That's the whole correct story of involution and evolution. And what evolutionary biologists today are learning is that there has to be a force that carries evolution up, and that is self-organization.